Welcome to the UK Pavilion, the award-winning UK Pavilion, for this afternoon's session on the rise of Indigenous languages. My name's Carmen Thompson. I'm a film programmer and distributor based in the UK. For the purposes of those listening, I'm a tall mixed-race woman with my hair in an afro bun, wearing a black Ghanaian print dress. I am super excited to be hosting this conversation today with these four incredible speakers who I'm going to let introduce themselves in a second. Just to give you a sense of the format, we're going to have a chat between us for about 45 minutes and then we're going to open it up. So this is a big topic, a juicy topic, so please do get your questions for these guys and we'll come to them at the end. Let's get into it because it's a big one. So I'm going to let you guys introduce yourself and just remind you to do your visual descriptions as well. Emanuele.
Hi there, my name is Emanuele Galloni, in English is Manuel Galloni. I am 184 centimeters tall, I got olive skin, I'm slightly overweight, and if that helps. And I'm wearing blue shoes, green trousers, and a dark blue shirt. And
actually, sorry, if I could say, if you could introduce who you are, but also maybe your connection to this topic of Indigenous languages to keep it focused.
Okay, I'm the head of content of a platform called My Culture, which is an Italian company and is totally dedicated to minority language productions, that being any sort of thing. So TV movies, or feature films, animation, short, all sorts of stuff. And I've been, though, in this industry for much longer than that. And My Culture came out like 3 years ago. But I've been running Video Plugger, which is a distribution company based in London. And Video Plugger, since 2014, has been focusing on minority language productions, particularly starting with Celtic language productions. So I would say originally Irish Gaelic, then Welsh, Scottish Gaelic, then Breton, and so on. And more recently, I started a production company called Connemaris Media, based in Italy as well, which is again going to focus on minority language productions and a few projects in the line, I think is that.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Kimberley.
Hi, I'm Kimberley. I should say pnawn da pawb, but it's good afternoon, everybody. So I'm currently the head of production at Ffilm Cymru. We are the development agency for Welsh film. I have a background, 18 years, I realised today, in a sad moment, of working in the film industry, so across distribution, sales, also some development and producing. And I am a white woman with blonde hair. I'm wearing mostly black. My connection with Welsh language film is particularly that I have executive produced 7 Welsh language films, shorts and features. I also more broadly shape funding initiatives and training to support their development as part of our remit. So Ffilm Cymru, we are the delegate of Arts Council Wales, also the BFI, and also Welsh Government's Creative Wales, again with that remit to develop a sustainable film sector in Wales.
Thank you. Mitch.
Hey everyone, I'm Mitchell Stanley. I'm a Wiradjuri man from Western New South Wales in Australia, which is 5 hours west of Sydney, 5 hours drive. I am mixed race, so I am olive to fair skin, blue eyes, brown hair, wearing jeans and a blue collared top. I work at No Coincidence Media, and we develop and produce both documentary and scripted. On the documentary side, we do features and series for predominantly the local broadcaster, and we're now here shopping our 3rd feature film.
Hello everyone, Ditch, as we say in Ireland. My name is Patrick O'Neill. I'm wearing a blue shirt. I have a slightly greying beard, or maybe mostly greying beard, and around 5'8". I own a company called Wildcard, so we're an Irish distribution company. We've been in operation now for 12 years, but around 2.5 years ago we got into production, and during that time we've made 2 Irish language feature films, Kneecap, which some of you may be familiar with, and also a film called Freywaka, which is an Irish language horror film that just went live on Shudder over the last couple of weeks. We do, English language films as well, and yeah, a wide variety including that one, Learning to Breathe Underwater, which we're the Irish producer on that as well.
And we have funded that too.
Thank you so much, guys. I want to start with production. And I'm going to come to you, Kim, first, because I wanted to maybe you could talk a bit about the fund that's you've recently launched at Ffilm Cymru, the Cinema Cymru Fund, which is a dedicated fund for Welsh language films. Maybe you could speak a bit about what you're finding this has enabled filmmakers making Welsh language films creatively. And I'm going to ask two questions, I guess, connected to that. Like, what are the specific challenges that filmmakers have come to you, I guess, versus filmmakers that are making films in English?
Okay.
Those aren't two big questions to ask.
So I don't remember all that. Thank you. Yes. So we've always had, or long had, dedicated funding for Welsh language film. Obviously, the language is protected. We're a bilingual nation. So I think at least since 2012, we've had various schemes, but the partnership we recently launched with S4C and Welsh Government's Creative Wales, which is Cinema Cymru, has been really fundamental for us being able to take the support that we provide to another level. So it's not just that we have 4 films in development a year and then 1 film a year can get up to 1.6 million before UK tax credit. It's also that we've committed to a programme of professional development to really ensure that our talent can just compete on a global stage. We're really lucky in Wales that we have a national broadcaster and also government that have that long-term vision. So that's exciting. For the first year, we partnered with Le Group West, which some of you will know. They're based out of Brittany. This was really important for us, not just because there is a simpatico with the language, and we'd worked with them previously. I believe in Brittany they have a version of the Welsh knot, which is a wooden block that children in Wales had to wear around their neck if they spoke Welsh. So I believe they have that with the Breton language. But equally, it was important for us to establish from the outset that Cinema Cymru was an ambitious and international scheme. It wasn't something that we were just doing in Wales for ourselves. And the results have been extremely exciting already, not just in galvanising some of our already established Welsh language voices, people like Mark Evans, Lee Haven-Jones, who made Blair the Feast, some of you might know. Eros Lynn, he made Heartbreakers, but he also worked with us on his first feature film, which was in Welsh. Carys Lewis. But it's also brought through a new wave of exciting, creative filmic voices, not all of whom have come from the really well-established TV landscape in Wales. So people like Yasser Khan, who his short Pink showed at the BFI Flair Festival last year. So it's really been just a call to action, and we've already seen a lot of exciting results. But like I said, that kind of commitment to professional development and having it be international from the start is really important, because we know that the films are still not super high budget. I mean, it's a good budget for a minority language film scheme. But it's more about that long-term learning and development journey as well, so that we make sure that at one point we don't need the scheme. That would be a dream.
Mitchell, can I come to you, and maybe you could speak a bit about your context? Because I think, for First Nations filmmakers, making films in indigenous languages, it has, an additional historical weight in the country. What is the institutional setup for supporting those films, and how maybe you could speak to how they're working and how you've sort of interacted with them?
Absolutely. So we have a federal funding agency at home called Screen Australia, and they have funding dedicated specifically to First Nations creatives. Through that pathway, it can only be accessed by Indigenous writers and directors. They cover development and production, and I guess it's there because they recognise that we have a long history of stories being told about us without us. So now there's opportunities and pathways for Indigenous creatives to ensure that they are telling their own stories from their perspective and not an anthropological, I can't say that word, that kind of approach, stories about us. So yeah, we've got Screen Australia there, and it has actually developed, some fantastic filmmakers like Warwick Thornton, Rachel Perkins, Wayne Blair. So yeah, that's the infrastructure that we have there.
And I mean, do you identify any gaps in where you'd like to see that develop, or how it's working?
I think it's actually really working. There's a lot of support. I mean, it was with Screen Australia's support that I got here. And I've been working in the industry for 20 years. I started in documentary and then moved into scripted. I can't see any gaps, but I'm sure there are.
And Patrick, maybe again you can speak to the Irish context. You guys have Cine4. Maybe you could speak about that institutional support in Ireland and how that's moving from, I guess, institutional policy to support to actual sort of audience engagement and moving it through the pipeline.
So there's a scheme in Ireland called Cine4 or ScreenUK is its Irish name. And it's a kind of a joint venture kind of situation between Screen Ireland, who are the national funding agency, TG Cahir, which are an Irish language broadcaster in Ireland, and there's also a fund called Commission Man, which is a broadcast fund. So the three of them launched, I think, about 10 years ago now, maybe, with the ambition of making a film a year. So with tax credits on top of that, I think now the value is in and around 1.5 million. So they've had some great successes through the years, notably on Colin Kuhn, The Quiet Girl, and Freywalker, which we made, was also through that scheme. But if you want to make a film in Irish, you can still do it through the normal structures. Like Kneecap was made not through that scheme, but the British Film Institute were involved, Northern Ireland Screen Ireland, Curzon, Sharads, more. It was a long finance plan. We did a film on the distribution side a couple of years ago called Black 47, which was set during the famine. And while it wasn't in Irish language, there was maybe 20% of the movie in Irish language. And we found that audiences really responded to that. In cinemas, it's rare for people to see it spoken on screen. We also distributed Kneecap and Freywalker recently. We didn't do on Colin Kuhn, unfortunately. But the box office figures, so Black 47, we did like 2 million box office out of Ireland. Both on Colin Kuhn and Kneecap did around 1.5 million. So we did see that it being in Irish wasn't necessarily a barrier. I'm not sure if many people went because it was in Irish, but we don't think it kept people away. But yeah, there's support structures, and if you make an application to Screen Ireland now for any film, on the homepage says, is the film in Irish or English or a mix of both. So it is something that the national agency is tracking and willing to support. And I know Cine Cahir want to do more films as well. And there's another scheme in the north of Ireland as well for supporting Irish language. So it is well set up. I think it helps as well with the changes to the Oscar entries a couple of years ago. So that ability for a nation or country to put forward a movie and give it a campaign and put a horse in that race is been really good.
I have a question, I guess, a practical question. To everyone, if you could maybe speak to how important you think it is that the people in the funds, the people making the decisions, understand or come from the context of the films that are being applying to the funds. I'm thinking the reason why I say it's a practical one, because, for example, if you're submitting a script in a Welsh language, you need the person reading it to speak Welsh, or I suppose you have to translate it into English in order for them to understand the film you want to make. Maybe in each of your contexts you could speak to that of the decision-making people.
I think, like, just given the market and the industry for film, like, I think everyone probably has an English version of that script as well, because people are encouraged to obviously get sales and distribution and maybe other finance. So I'm not sure how many of the Screen Ireland staff are Irish speakers. The Irish language broadcaster, I assume everyone speaks Irish there. So from the Irish perspective, I would imagine those scripts exist in dual. In when we did kneecap, because over half the film is in Irish, but there's a lot of English in it as well. I know when we were putting that film out to market, we just had like what was going to be in Irish was in like italics. It was identified as what was in Irish and what was in English. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of them speaks Irish, but that was the last time I checked, so I could be wrong. But it is a completely different landscape to Welsh, isn't it? So 40% of my team are fluent Welsh speakers. And all of us have, most of us have a relationship with the language. We learn it up to GCSE compulsory if we're Welsh, but not all my team are. I suppose it's also about looking at the other forms of diversity that we're trying to support. And as a small team, particularly Ffilm Cymru, that can be a challenge, but I think it's incredibly important. I mean, that's the short answer. I think you have to have that representation within your company. You have to be ensuring that you are somewhat representing the diversity of your nation, which exists in Wales beyond the Welsh language. But I think also there are limitations to that, as Patrick has said, and so it's, for me, also equally important to look at the ways of working. You cannot rely on a couple of people who are particularly passionate about one area of work. That wouldn't be right to do either. So, baking it into your processes, looking at ways of working is the only way you would actually move the dial long term. So similar, I guess, to Ireland, all of our application forms, guidelines are bilingual, but they're also in large fonts. We have a policy of fee for participation in our training, so all the talent that took part in our Le Group West Cinema Cymru lab, we're paid for their time, we support childcare, we have access bursaries. These things are signposted up top without people having to ask for them, because obviously we know that's another barrier. So you basically design activity to ensure that everybody is on as equal a level playing field as possible from the off, and then continually learn from the people that you are supporting around that as well. But yeah, I think these are foundational principles for Ffilm Cymru. Pay, not assuming everybody has got generational wealth, is a big one. For Wales is predominantly a working class nation. I think people will kill me for saying that, but we are in terms of our history.
In Australia, we are quite fortunate to have pathways and protocols that have been designed as guidelines for filmmakers and anyone trying or attempting to start developing films, whether it's developing a script that might be in language. One of the protocols are to ensure that if you are using that certain language, that you have the permission to do so. And when you're going to apply for funding, there's a rigorous test that the funding agencies must follow in accordance with the guidelines. And it's not just with language, but story, art, dance, communication in any form. And we've had them for about 20 years, I'd like to say. So yeah, it's quite rigorous and it is checked. And in the screen agencies, there usually is an Indigenous representative. And if they're overflooded with projects to assess, there are filmmakers and producers out in the industry that they engage to assess, provided there's no conflicts of interest and you don't know the person. They do reach out, so we've got that there.
Amazing. Emanuele, I'm going to bring you in here because this panel is called The Rise of Indigenous Languages. You said at the beginning in your intro you've been working, platforming content in minority languages for over 10 years. How have you seen that rise? What are the major changes that you've seen in that time in terms of audiences' interactions with films in Indigenous and minority languages?
My initial approach to minority language production was as a distributor or a sales agency, if you like. And that was because originally my British company, Video Plugger, was focusing on the distribution or representation of Italian content, that being from RISE, like the Italian BBC, if you like. And we got a point where we wanted to expand our mandate or trying to get more products. And being a small company, as we were at the time, and we were trying to find some quality products around that had potential. And my initial approach back then was through a beautiful series called Carmen, produced in Irish language by an Irish producer, and which was one of the top products at the time, the initial few series coming out from TG4. And what I was surprised at the time, there was a lot of talent, a lot of great productions already then, already in 2014. And the producers, they had no idea that that kind of product could go and travel beyond their borders. They're just saying, well, who's going to ever watch anything in Irish language or in Scottish Gaelic or in Welsh or anything? Because there was no trust. And therefore, the problem was that none of the necessary steps that are fundamental for you to be able to distribute your title internationally were done. That means, for instance, not clearing the music internationally, or that means, for instance, not even clearing their actors sometimes for this kind of rights. And plenty of other small or bigger shortcomings of any kind that you can imagine. I think from when we started, and again, we started with the Irish Gaelic, then we went into Welsh, and into Scottish Gaelic, Breton, and so on. Also thanks to many panels like this, some of which I've actually been invited to, where people like us have been pushing producers to make all those steps. Then things actually being done in the right way. But also, I think the visibility on international level in various platforms of all sorts has been increasing, and therefore giving more trust and confidence in the producer in making those steps, thinking, okay, this is actually going to bring me some finance, and whenever I'm going to go and trying to find some money from people like Kimberley, then my business plan is involving also getting distribution in this particular country and somewhere else, and making sure that that's all consistent with what the financial plan is all about. This is at a very indie level, okay? And later on, what I've seen in terms of progress is, I think some groundbreaking production was, for instance, Hinterland. I'm not sure if you are familiar with Kimberley, for sure you are. Yes. That was a very clever idea. That was co-financed by All 3 Media, if I'm not wrong. And that was done in a special technique, which is called back-to-back. Basically involves in shooting the same scenes twice. So all the other scenes where there's no dialogue were shot like normally only once, but when there was dialogue, every single scene was shot first in Welsh and then in English, all the other way around. And as boring as it sounds and costly, the reason behind was that through All 3 Media there was already a plan to license it to Netflix and to other broadcasters, including the BBC, if I'm not wrong, for making special version for all those broadcasters that would increase again money to come towards the budget, for the production budgets. It's an interesting strategy. Some purists, I would say, will be a bit like, I don't like it because it should be only Welsh, only Breton, or only whatever. I can see some faces there in that direction. But I think ultimately what we want to know, and I add myself for a reason I'm going to explain you shortly, we want to see our languages travel, right? And we want to see those productions happening. And if that's a compromise, I think it's a good compromise, because ultimately make those dreams, those stories that we all want to tell, possible to tell. Very, very short about myself. I don't speak any indigenous language. Many people will wonder why the hell this guy is here. I'm Italian. The mother of my children is Swedish. My kids speak three different languages. And I have been living as a foreigner in the UK for many, many years, trying to make sure that my kids could speak 3 languages. And whilst none of those languages is a Celtic language or a minority language, somewhat it is. And this is one of the reasons why I was moved to work with people like you guys, because I very much feel the struggle of living with your language in a majoritarian scenario. And that makes me somewhat close to your needs. I mean, carrying on, trying to be fast, is to, I think that the major progress you were asking about is that thanks not just to minority language production, but also to big success like Squid Games, for instance, on a major platform like Netflix, made people way more used to foreign language and to listen to foreign language. I know that Squid Games was also available in English as well with dubbing, and more foreign language production now in big platforms like that are now available with dubbing. But Squid Games, I think, was one of the first where a lot of people wanted to listen to original sound, and even given the option, they would rather get those sounds themselves. What helped was also COVID somewhat, because people couldn't travel, they couldn't do anything, they would stay at home. And I think it's like when you go to a Chinese restaurant or a Greek restaurant or wherever you live, you want to leave that experience a bit more close, a bit more genuine, especially when you cannot travel, you're stuck where you are. A lot of people back in those days during COVID that couldn't travel, somewhat could travel by watching those things and listening to those foreign sounds that they could accustom themselves for. And that was making, I think, way more interesting, more exciting, and more accustomed. So once again, I think that kind of phenomena has helped production in all our languages, if you like, to be more, to gather more appeal.
Thank you. No, thank you. Patrick, I want to throw it to you as a distributor if we're talking about audiences. Thinking of titles like Kneecap, The Quiet Girl, what particular strategies do you think whether helped it reach audiences in the way that they did these films? Like what are the strategies as a distributor you're thinking about?
Like it's terrible to say, but at the start when you had an Irish language film, you were nearly looking at it like a foreign language film. That's a terrible thing to say, but we don't have the same kind of art house circuit you would have in the UK. We don't have Curzon or Picture House. We have like essentially 2 art house cinemas in Dublin. We had one in Galway, just recently closed down, very sadly. There's a part-time one in Cork, but that's kind of it, you know. So you're essentially having to put these films into multiplexes. So you're trying to make them look and feel, in truth, like mainstream films a lot of the time, and just to highlight the importance of that. But there are different things, like for example, in Ireland they have something called Shocked in the Gaeilge, which is like 2 weeks in March usually, where there's a focus on the Irish language. So, you know, we do a lot of school screenings and things around that. And there are companies that are really enthusiastic about it. There's an animation company you may be familiar with called Cartoon Saloon. So we would release a lot of films with them. And we have done Irish language versions of their animated movies like Wolfwalkers and Puff and Rock for children. And we can find that's a good opportunity to reach young audiences as well. So yeah, in terms of releasing films then, I'm trying to think back to the Kneecap trailer. I'd say some of it's in Irish, and probably a lot of it in English, because it needs to be kind of a global thing. But yeah, we would do not much differently from what we would do normally. We would take every film, if it's English or Irish, and look at something specific, and we have someone in our office that is their job as like a grassroots outreach person. So they will find kind of little bits of identity within that film and kind of mine communities to try and mobilize them. So when you're talking about an Irish language film, there are lots of organizations willing to support that, that can communicate amongst their members to try and get them into cinema. And while a lot of people wouldn't speak Irish day to day, we do learn it in school, in primary and secondary. So I'd like to think everyone has like a base knowledge from school. So so hopefully it's not a turn off for people potentially going to see a movie in Irish.
Well, it certainly wasn't with those 2 films. Mitchell, with the films you're making, I'm thinking, there's always this question. I'm also a distributor of this idea of films that are very, very specifically located, but then thinking about how to sell them internationally. I wonder, when it comes to Indigenous languages and the filmmakers you're working with, the films you're making, how do you thinking about strategies of reaching international audiences, and especially when they're in Indigenous languages?
Yeah, good question. As Emanuele and Patrick alluded to, like, where we're living in a world where people want to hear it told from the language that the stories originated from, to make it more authentic. I don't think people are worried about reading subtitles. I personally don't like dubbing. I want to hear it in the language that the actor is performing it in. But there is much thought as to who we're making the film for, and we do that very early on in the development stage. For example, The Mugai, which opened at Sundance last year, we knew whilst it's not in language, we knew it was a story that we wanted our people to resonate with and be proud of, because it unearths a story of, stolen generation, how the colony would steal our children. But the first thing that was erased, or they tried to erase, was our language. So there's a sense of pride when we do use our languages, particularly in documentary. It's not something that we shy away from. And of course, we don't have the single language in Australia. We've got over 300 languages. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
No, it did. Kim, yeah, maybe I'm thinking of what you were speaking about earlier about this intersectionality of the Welsh language, and how it intersects with lots of other different spaces within Wales. That you can't isolate language as one space. Maybe you can think about speak a bit about how that plays out when you're thinking about how to roll out films, when you're thinking about how they exist in the world and how to kind of speak about them to audiences and get audiences to interact with them.
Yeah, I'm just trying to unpick that. I think, like I said, it's kind of impossible to extricate the Welsh language and its perception from class. Mm-hmm. I think within the UK landscape, we have come on great bounds, mm-hmm. But there is a different relationship there, and therefore there needs to be a different positioning, right? I think there was an inquiry into education in Wales in the 1800s called the Blue Books, and it basically described the Welsh as lazy, dirty, and lawless, which, as much as that's my personal brand, is, yes, we share this brand. It's fair to say it did kind of have ripple effects that live in the psyche of the UK even today, obviously in a subconscious way often. So I think there is still a hangover from that, of how much our talents are taken seriously, even if they are not fluent Welsh speakers, but if they have an accent. Particularly in terms of being ill-educated or rural or perhaps old-fashioned. And I think these things are slowly changing. But I've noticed there's still a certain kind of rule on how many Welsh films can be made and also what kind of Welsh films. There's still a kind of so I regularly go out and I'm kind of got a slate of films and I'm pitching them, and there's still certain responses around, oh, that's not quite what we thought you'd come with, where it's not the kind of rural story. But again, I mean, other small nations and minority languages have done a lot to help us in this conversation, and broader diversity conversations as well. I feel like things are changing. But I also feel like maybe the Welsh is still the acceptable butt of the joke, right? So you'll see us propping up still on screen as a kind of light relief comic, or maybe drunk, right? Again, Irish, you get that as well.
I'm actually drunk now.
I mean, look, we are very funny and also sometimes drunk. I'm not denying that. But if you go to Cardiff around a rugby, it's not going to back me up here. But at the same time, as I alluded to earlier, over 20% of our population speak Welsh, and there are numerous people outside of Wales who speak Welsh. We think of Patagonia, obviously, and lots of other places. So it is still very much a growing language. There is a growing amount of people who identify as part of the global majority who are fluent Welsh speakers. There's lots of people that live in cities. There's very few who are minors. I don't know any minors. So I think it's just these kind of preconceptions, not just about the Welsh language, but also of the Welsh and of perhaps those outside of the capital, whatever country it may be, that we are trying to disrupt. But it feels like we have to get audience engagement early to kind of test these ideas and also to kind of prove our case a little bit more of why this is a Welsh story, why something that is perhaps a bit more edgy is authentically Welsh. I mean, Wales is a quietly angry nation that has centuries of storytelling tradition. We think about the Mabinogi, which is one of the oldest UK prose texts in existence. I feel like that is the makings of a film industry that should be taken seriously. And I suppose what we're trying to do is disrupt this myth of the comedy Welsh character that you still see quite a lot. But in terms of audiences, we really do put a lot of support on marketing materials, particularly on the Welsh language films, but also on the films that maybe are led by underrepresented voices, maybe they're lower budget. We think about bilingual marketing materials, but we also think about, as Patrick alluded to, kind of giving it a boost with specific publicists, film experts, but who can also understand the landscape and the nature of what we're trying to say.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what I think is important for this as well is advocates. So, you know, when we've got Paul Mescal or Cillian Murphy out into the world kind of speaking Irish at times, it's really good. And I'm always reminded of Michael Sheen, you know, and I think like those kind of people with that profile, when they use it to kind of not promote the language as such, but bring it to many ears around the world, I always think that can be very impactful. We had it a little bit with kneecap as well. You know, in Ireland, they have actually labelled it the kneecap effect. Like Irish was never cool, and it's that idea now that younger kids are actually becoming more enthusiastic about the language, and yeah, they've labelled it the kneecap effect, which is kind of cool.
I love how you said about, you know, disrupting, and I think that comes to authenticity as well. Like how we want our people to be perceived, not necessarily may differ from what is currently perceived. So when have we seen Indigenous people as characters like if you say you're the butt of the joke, we're usually, come from poverty or low socioeconomic characters. So we have the ability as authentic filmmakers to change that perception of who we are around the world. So
I think there is an element, like you said, in general, of anything which is foreign to be caricaturized, if you see what I'm saying. And that's the tension. But what I find amazing, particularly with Wales, but of course also in Ireland, is the level of professionalism, and the fact that maybe I'm just naive, but at the level of cooperative approach among various producers, I see the same people in different production companies all the time, in various positions. But also what I like about the Welsh and the Irish particularly, and to some extent the Scottish Gaelic as well in the UK, is the fact that there is an elevation of the language. The ability of speaking the language is a skill, and the skill is visible and witnessed by the fact that that person speaks the language, is on television, is doing cool things on a creative level. That elevates the opportunity. It's not just a boring skill to learn at school up to GCSE because I have to, but it's because it actually gives me an opportunity. And I wish this was also spread in other minorities. The many I work with, particularly nobody knows, but in Italy there are 20 minority languages spoken, all different for different sources, but in France it's the same and elsewhere. But there is no such elevation, there's no such level of pride and understanding of the value of the skill and which doors can be opened by those skills.
Thank you. I wanted to you were all nodding, so I just wanted to make sure that anyone didn't have anything to respond to that point specifically. No. Okay. I'm going to open it up in like 3 minutes to the audience, but I just wanted to quickly talk about, I guess, how this plays out across different forms of distribution, not just beyond theatrical, because I know that you've all worked across theatrical, broadcast, SVOD. We've spoken about different platforms. I'm going to open this up I had individual questions, but given the time, I'm going to open it up as a big question. To maybe you can speak to how the differences you found across platforms. Are you finding any specific growth areas where there's more opportunities or more response or more appetite for films and content in Indigenous languages? Any of you can take that. We can start here.
Obviously, but I work in film predominantly, so I'm going to say film is, I think particularly with our partnerships, film is an area where I think we can see some really exciting voices in the next couple of years. And I think also because maybe they'll have more room to take risks that wouldn't make sense always in broadcast if you're thinking about a particular core audience that you're serving. Also, I'm really ambitious and hopeful that we can get more and more, higher budgets for Welsh language film, because we've got to admit this is a big part of how we are judged as a nation is our available budgets, which vary wildly. And so, you know, Cinema Cymru, 1.6 million, then the tax credit. This is pretty decent, again, for a minority language scheme. But we're also helping filmmakers to package projects now in the Welsh language, where we're seeing there is international appetite. And I guess to kind of touch on what we've been saying before, like, the end of my sentence around Welsh identity is that we've always had a really strong relationship with certain nations in Europe and a strong understanding there. It's never been a question, which is so refreshing. I think now we've got to a point where in the UK we're having a similar response, where it's an exciting thing rather than a kind of cultural discount, which I've been told a few times. But isn't it really a cultural bonus? Actually, if you think about Basque Country, you think about Ireland, you think about these legacies of colonialism that many of us have been through.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's important to kind of find your tribe in a way as well. So when we were making Freywalker, I'll not name names, but the amount of sales agents who said, oh, why don't you just make it in English, you know? And, you know, we went with New Europe Film Sales. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with them, but they're brilliant. But they're based out of Poland, and they're more European artist director. And they were like, no, we really wanted an Irish. You know, that's what will make it stand out. And, you know, that sold a Shudder, and it wasn't that big a deal for them. I think you kind of need to own the identity in a little bit as well, you know? Because I think the audiences are sometimes sophisticated, and they can sense when something isn't authentic, you know? So, you know, we're doing a movie probably next year, the year after, that's set like 2,000 years ago in Ireland. So that you know, we never think for a second that that'll have to be in English or something, because it's just not going to ring true, you know? So
I would just drop... Mitchell, please. No.
I don't have an answer.
Okay. Well, I just want to say something about opportunities for minority language productions. Some of the things that work a lot from a distribution point of view are niches. So there are niches in very many genres that we'll want to eat, we want to swallow, we want to manage to find as many titles as possible in particular genres. And that could be all sorts of things, from hunting and fishing, probably you're never going to touch that kind of subject, to LGBT-related content, to a crime series, for instance, which is something which I suggest everybody to get involved with, because crime pays. And all those genres, there are broadcasters, platforms all over the world that we want to have. Then there is a subject about animation. We were discussing with this gentleman here the other day about the fact that a lot of minority language broadcasters, they don't have the infrastructures to produce themselves animations or children programs in their own language. And those are so fundamental for the language to be passed over to the next generations that they actually do need them. What they can do, though, is to dub it, which is much cheaper than producing a new production. And that means that a lot of minority language broadcasters, I can tell you, for instance, in Italy, we work a lot with the Friulian languages, Sardinian languages, and so on. There's no animation in those languages, so what they will do, they will buy from my distribution company titles that they will find locally, the dubbers, to do it in a way so the kids listen from very early age their own language, they recognize themselves, and they think, okay, that's cool, I listen to it in the television, must be something useful for me. And they learn basic concepts that are very important for them. And then there is also another element that where minority language broadcasters themselves, they prefer to acquire content that comes from other minorities, because it's consistent with their ethos, with what they're trying to do and say. And that applies also in co-productions, where I hope to see Ffilm Cymru and many other film fans to cooperate with each other, because it makes a lot of sense to find ways where multilingual communities like the ones we're talking about today can help each other to produce and tell amazing stories.
I did have something to add. What you were saying about finding your tribe is, you know, finding those sales agents and distributors that can reach the audience that you're making the film for. I think those kind of partners recognize that the traditional audience is no longer traditional, and it's continuing to evolve. And as the younger audiences come up, their type of viewing is different to what I was viewing in the 90s, you know. So it's finding those people that know how to get the audiences that are constantly changing.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up. We have a roaming mic that's at the back there, so if you could wait for it to come to you, just stick your hand up who's brave. Here we go.
Hi guys, my name's Duncan. I'm from Scotland, and I just want to say I've really resonated with this panel, especially what you guys were saying about commonly being seen as kind of the butt of the joke, either lazy or drunk.
Just
it's
therapy
far too
today.
common. Yeah. I recently just finished a short film in Doric, which, for those who don't know, is a language spoken in the northeast of Scotland. And all throughout production, me and my producer were told, if you want this film to be successful, stop this, wild idea, just do it in English. And we ignored that advice, maybe foolishly, and we're really happy with the result. However, an issue that we face is that Doric, along with lots of other languages in the UK, is seen as a dialect and not a language. Even Scots, which is legally recognised as its own language, constantly, I'm commonly faced with the opinion that no, it's just English. You're just speaking English wrong. So I was just wondering, in your guys' opinion, I mean, for one, I didn't realise, 40 languages in Italy, 300 in Australia, and anyone that's been, to the UK can tell you there's countless in the UK. You go to the town over, and people are speaking differently. I'm just wondering if you guys see a kind of expansion on these programs to reach out to dialects and other kind of, although they're dialects of English, there's such variety in them, and I'm just wondering if you guys see, this rise of Indigenous languages eventually reaching dialects such as, well, for example, my partner's from Newcastle, which is, just an hour down the coast from where I'm from, and then sometimes she speaks and I go, what are you saying? And so there's just such variety and history in how we speak, and it's so constantly just scrubbed away, especially in the film industry. We're told, you need to speak proper if you want to succeed. So I just wonder if you guys see these kind of initiatives expanding to dialects and such things.
Yeah, even as a distributor, we've done a few films in Cork, which, they speak English in Cork, but the accent can be quite strong, and the amount of times people will ask us to put on subtitled screenings for that. But I think education is a big part of it as well, and without getting too political and talking about empire and colonial past or anything like that, but I think everyone's more aware of the damage that has been done to language through the years, and it is not the fault of this generation. They are carrying that historical burden of that, but I think people are facing up to that now and kind of maybe engaging with that a lot more. So, yeah, I can only see it rising. I think, the problem with the film industry is so dominated by American culture. And, I'm not saying we have to fight back against that or anything, but I think, you'd love to see audiences getting to a stage where it's a wide menu that people can enjoy.
And I think I guess it's young filmmakers or of any age being brave enough to tell the stories they want to tell. It's kind of up to them. It's their story. And just knowing that there is an appetite, why wouldn't you tell the story the way you want to do it? If someone disagrees with you, I would think, well, tell your own bloody story the way you want to. Don't tell me how to do mine. In collaboration, of course, though.
I think it's interesting. I think it's very much already part of the natural discussion in Wales. I mean, I'm what you call a gog, so that's Gogledd means north, so I don't sound like the sing-songy, like the Swansea accent that people mostly hear. So, you have different dialects there, and you have different cultures, more akin to Manchester, Liverpool at times. So I think that's something that we're already really excited by, but clearly for us, just on a broader note, making sure that we're not too Cardiff-centric, or also within Wales, that our work isn't dominated by middle class, which it often is, even the Welsh language work. There are a lot of working class Welsh speakers, of course, but reaching out to them is our priority. And I think, again, that speaks to the ways that you're working, but it also speaks to the broader systemic problems in the film industry of how challenging it is to start and maintain a career without certain financial safety nets. But I'm excited by dialect. Also, even Wenglish, things like Popty Ping is not like real Welsh, but I wrote a dissertation on Wenglish at Oxford. I don't think they wanted me to, but I just find that kind of reinvention of the language, as it always is, really exciting. And in Cardiff also we see some of our Somali population, the largest in the UK, for example, reinventing the Welsh language. We see different cultural groups making it their own, and that's more exciting to me than, you know, the perfect Welsh that people think about.
To answer another point of view, my culture, the platform that I'm involved with, is also including all sorts of dialects into the programming of the platform itself. But you mentioned the situation in Italy. There is a law in Italy that sets up which are the officially recognized minority language, which are 6 or 7, and the law is called the 482, and there are a lot of other languages which are absolutely non-intelligible with each other that are not recognized as such, but maybe they are recognized by the local authorities, like within the region or somewhere else. I am totally with Mitchell in what he said before. The story you tell, it will be more authentic if it's told in a way that actually represents the local situation. I knew about Doric from, obviously this is my job, but I mean, I knew about it. I saw something on YouTube as well. And I think if you want to tell a story, actually wants to be told in that language, you should, you know, and it will add another layer and then another level of interest in that particular production. I would also say that there are certain productions. What's it called? L'Amica Speciale. My Brilliant Friend was an HBO production, co-production between HBO and RAI, the Italian State Television. That was done in America, financed in America, but done in Naples, in ancient Napolitan. Now, Napolitan I don't understand. My father doesn't understand it. We don't understand. And in Italy, was actually broadcast with Italian subtitles. And I think it was Sky UK broadcasting it in here. In there. And that was an amazing story. And the most authentic way to tell it, it was in the original dialect that I had to obviously research upon and trying to find the best way to use that particular language. So it really goes down to the storytelling technique and why you want to use it. And if you find a good reason for doing it, then go for it.
Thank you. Another one here.
Hello. I represent Screen Cornwall, so we have ScreenUK, which has just been enshrined in the media bill in the UK for the first time as a minority language. So we're quite at the beginning of our journey in bringing language to the media. We've mainly done short films. I'm just interested in terms of how this sits within a bigger market. So, you know, drama's very, very hard to fund, you know, getting more expensive. I'm just interested to know what people think about how to represent a minority language through other kind of mediums, like, you know, the unscripted side, where you might be more likely to get, say, television funding or short form as a way to sort of proliferate and give people a window into those places. And this is for a global market because we've got massive diaspora. So actually our market outside of the UK is probably as big as the one inside the UK.
Thank you. Is anyone who...
It's probably an obvious comment, but I guess we can talk about genre. I mean, Wales is very known for horror in particular. Maybe too much. I'm trying to get not horror on the slate at the moment, but it does also authentically go back to some of our ancient texts. If you look at them, there's just a horror there, and maybe also a little bit of our history. I think if you think about a film like Blair, The Feast in English, it premiered at South by Southwest, was sold by Bankside. There is resonance and echoes in that of certain ancient Welsh texts purposefully. And I think that's actually what gave that horror its depth. So for me, it's not, oh, that was a great film in spite of the language. It's actually understanding that the language gave what could have been a more conventional horror some new depth and originality and that weight of meaning that everyone is always looking for in film, certainly when it comes to elevated genre that can cut through on a small budget. But I feel like I'm looking at Patrick.
Just in terms of the market, like, drama is hard in any language, so, you know, having it in a different language may actually in some ways elevate it and make it a little bit more distinctive and stand out, you know. And I can't recall, what did you say the language is called? Kimberley. So if you've got the first ever Kimberley language feature film, that's something to tell a festival programmer that might kind of raise interest, you know. But I'm sure people in the room are familiar with this, and we struggle as well. Is like, you know, that kind of middle of the road drama in any language is very hard. You know, we're finding more and more you do need to kind of, you know, turn the dial a little bit to make it distinctive into like a, not necessarily thriller or horror, but it could be comedy or romance or, you know, yeah. So it's not just a language problem. It's
We had one more question here. If I could ask for it to be very concise, and if I could ask the answer to be very concise as well, because we're basically at the end. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm also from Scotland, and so much of this has resonated with me. What I wanted to ask was, how do you find co-production and approaching that, knowing that you want to use an Indigenous language in your project? So is it something that you find that countries or institutions that don't have that as a focus, do they understand where you're coming from, and are they open to it? Is it something that you yourselves have done before, where because of your focus on Indigenous languages, you're open to co-production with other nations?
The first one we did was a co-production, and we had language from both Australia and New Zealand, called We Are Still Here. And there was, again, going back to what Patrick was saying, finding the tribe. We were working with a production team. Even though they're from New Zealand, we had many things in common artistically, but also being from people from First Nations. But also our screen officers both had language as a priority, so that kind of made it easier. But to get down to the point of it, it's finding your tribe.
NECAP was a co-production with the UK, and it was developed through a scheme called Mother Tongues. I don't know, are you guys familiar with that? It's like, it is a development scheme for non-English language British films, I think. But partners in that are like Charade, like a French sales agent, you know, and, you know, the creative agency Intermission, which I think they're largely based out of the Netherlands. So, yeah, I don't see it as being too much of a barrier. Well, the UK Global Screen Fund now is doing good work, but I think it is a problem for the UK not to be in Eurimage. So, yeah, I think that's probably a barrier to co-pro.
Thank you. Oh, you.
I can tell a very quick story. I mean, I was
Very
on the
quick,
production.
please.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been there, and I think in general there is a sense of similarity in the diversity of all the people who speak minority languages at large. And we all face the same problems. And I think that makes a lot of sense, trying to find common grounds. And I think the Creative Europe, which my production company, together with this gentleman here, who just won, which includes all the Celtic languages, is an amazing tool that I suggest anybody here to take in consideration for their productions, especially if there is any common ground that can be exploited in that situation.
I think, like in the UK, you probably have challenges domestically you need to address. So, for example, Ireland, our tax credit is increasing this month to 40%. So there's a base 32 plus 8 to 40% for films under 20 million, but it's largely based around EU nationality and the EU identity. So I'm not sure if UK people are going to be classified as that, which is a bit of an issue. The
one thing to take into consideration, Patrick, is that what you say is absolutely true. On one end, there is talks from Starmer that we may go back into Creative Europe, wishing, but if it's not, I mean, as a British company, you can still cooperate with a European or more European company and get the Creative Europe anyway. It's not going to be in your budget, but it's going to be in their budget. If you
like Learning to Breathe Underwater, we just did. So that's Ireland, UK, and Netherlands.
And
Film Cymru. But sorry, I put you in the UK. So
yeah,
we were involved in a film called The End.
We are still in the UK, just to be clear. We're not.
I feel like we're approaching a conversation to happen off the stage. I just want to thank all of our speakers, everyone for coming. And this, as I say, this is a conversation that will hopefully continue. And I think one of the takeaways, I think, is this finding your tribe. I think thinking across borders, thinking about people who share these same histories, finding people to collaborate with is something, that we hope that this conversation will be part of. And if you could join me in thanking Emanuele, Kim, Mitchell, and Patrick.
Can I say one last thing?
Oh, one more thing.
Just make good films, whatever language they're in, please. Thank you.
Thank you.